The universe had a way of humbling those who thought they understood it. Ambassador Relani of the Velith species had spent 400 years serving the Galactic Assembly. She had welcomed 47 species into the fold. She had turned hostile civilizations into productive members of galactic society. She had never failed. Today, she stood aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony of Voices as it emerged from hyperspace at the edge of an unremarkable solar system. Her bioluminescent skin patterns flickered with the soft blue of confidence as she reviewed her briefing materials one final time. Earth, she said aloud, tasting the strange word, a Category 7 death world. Subcommander Prask shifted uncomfortably beside her. The Dorothy officer was built like a boulder, with 4 muscular arms and scales that had seen combat. Yet something about this mission made his claws tap nervously against his console. Ambassador, perhaps we should review the intelligence reports again, he suggested. Relani waved a slender hand dismissively. I have read them, Subcommander. Extreme temperature variations, deadly pathogens, apex predators on every continent, tectonic instability. I am aware of the dangers their homeworld presents. It is not their world that concerns me, Prask replied quietly. It is what they have done despite it. The briefing files painted a disturbing picture. Humanity had discovered nuclear fission and immediately used it as a weapon against themselves. They had fought continuous wars throughout their entire recorded history. They had nearly rendered their own planet uninhabitable through pollution and conflict, and yet they had survived. They had thrived. They had reached for the stars. Every species has violent origins, Relani said. The assembly exists to guide them toward peace. These humans are simply young. They will learn. Prask said nothing, but his 4 hands continued their nervous rhythm. The harmony of voices glided deeper into the system. Relani noticed the crew growing tense as sensor data began streaming across their displays. She moved to the main viewport and felt her confidence waver for the first time. Shipyards, dozens of them, hidden within asteroid fields, defense platforms bristling with weapons she did not recognize, communication satellites filling every orbital lane with encrypted chatter. This was not the infrastructure of a primitive species learning to crawl among the stars. This was preparation. Ambassador, the communications officer called out, we are receiving a transmission. On screen, the message appeared in perfect galactic standard, without error or accent. Someone had taken the time to learn their language flawlessly. Unidentified vessel, you have entered sovereign human space. State your intentions and prepare for escort. Relani straightened her robes. Open a channel. This is Ambassador Relani of the Galactic Assembly Diplomatic Mission. We come in peace to establish formal relations with the species known as humanity. Silence stretched for 30 long seconds, then the response came. Acknowledged, Ambassador, escort vessel is en route, do not deviate from your current heading. Before Relani could respond, every alarm on the bridge began screaming. What is happening? She demanded. Prask stared at his console with all 4 eyes wide. Something is powering up at the edge of our sensor range. Something massive. The tactical display updated. A shape appeared, growing larger as more data streamed in. Relani watched the scale indicators adjust once, twice, 3 times. Her mouth went dry. That cannot be correct, she whispered. The vessel emerging from behind a gas giant's moon was over 12 kilometers long. Its hull was a patchwork of armor plates, welded and reinforced over what appeared to be battle damage. Gun emplacements lined its surface like scales on a predator. It moved with the slow inevitability of a continental drift. Their ship is larger than most assembly space stations, Prask said, his voice barely audible. How did they build this without us knowing? Relani had no answer. The Galactic Assembly had been watching this system for decades. They had seen humanity's first tentative steps into space. They had monitored their primitive satellites and clumsy rockets. They had assumed they understood this species. They had been wrong. The massive vessel took position between the harmony of voices and the inner system. It made no aggressive moves. It simply existed. A wall of metal and weapons that blocked any path forward. A new transmission arrived. The face on the screen belonged to a human female with dark skin and gray streaking her hair. Her expression was calm, almost serene. She wore a uniform that bore scars as numerous as her ship's hull. Ambassador Relani, the human said, I am Captain Dara Okonkwo of the Prometheus. Welcome to human space. We have been expecting you for a very long time. Relani stared at the screen, at the impossible ship, at the quiet confidence of this woman who commanded it. For 400 years, she had brought species into the assembly. She had shown them the benefits of cooperation, she had demonstrated the futility of resistance. Looking at the Prometheus and its captain, she realized with growing unease that humanity might be the first species to show her something different. Captain Okonkwo, she managed, we look forward to productive discussions. The human smiled, it did not reach her eyes. So do we, Ambassador. So do we. The Prometheus began to move, and the harmony of voices followed. In its shadow, Relani wondered, for the first time in centuries, if she had finally met a species the assembly could not absorb. 3 days into the escort, Prelate Voss made a discovery that changed everything. The crystalline being had spent those days studying human cultural transmissions. It was standard procedure for any first contact mission: learn the target species' values, their fears, their weaknesses. The information would prove useful during integration negotiations, but nothing about humanity was standard. Voss projected their findings onto the main conference table where Ambassador Relani and Subcommander Prask waited. The images showed cities, artwork, religious ceremonies, political rallies, war memorials, and celebrations. I do not understand what I am seeing, Voss admitted, their light-based voice carrying notes of confusion. This species has over 7,000 distinct languages. They practice hundreds of different religions. Their political systems range from democratic republics to authoritarian states. They have been fighting each other for their entire existence. Relani studied the images. This is common among young species. Unity comes with maturity. You misunderstand, Ambassador. Voss shifted the display to show historical records. They achieved spaceflight while still divided. They built their first orbital stations while their nations pointed nuclear weapons at each other. They constructed that ship out there while still arguing about borders and resources. The crystalline being paused. They never unified. They simply learned to function despite their divisions. Prask leaned forward. That should be impossible. A species cannot maintain the coordination required for advanced technology without centralized authority, and yet they have, Voss replied. Through the viewport, the Prometheus continued its patient escort. Relani watched it move and noticed details she had missed before. The hull was not uniformly constructed. Different sections showed different design philosophies, different manufacturing techniques. It was as if multiple nations had each built a piece and then welded them together, because that was exactly what had happened. A request for communication appeared on Relani's console. It came from the Prometheus. She accepted. Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka appeared on screen. The young human communications officer had been their primary contact during the journey. She spoke 17 dialects of Galactic Standard with a fluency that exceeded most assembly members. Ambassador, Captain Okonkwo invites you and 2 guests to dine aboard the Prometheus this evening. She believes direct interaction would benefit our mutual understanding. Relani hesitated. Boarding an alien warship was not standard diplomatic protocol, but nothing about this mission followed protocol. We accept, she said. Hours later, Relani, Prask, and Voss walked through corridors that could have housed entire assembly cruisers. Human crew members passed them constantly. They represented every shade of skin color, every physical variation their species possessed. They spoke to each other in different languages, argued about different sports teams, practiced different customs during meal breaks, and yet they worked together seamlessly. Captain Okonkwo welcomed them in a dining room that overlooked the main hangar. Through the windows, Relani could see hundreds of smaller craft undergoing maintenance. The scale of it staggered her. Please, sit, Okonkwo said. The food has been prepared to accommodate your species' dietary requirements. We have been studying your biology since you entered our space. Since you entered our space. Not since you arrived. The implication was clear. Humanity had been watching long before the diplomatic vessel reached them. Prask could not contain his curiosity. Captain, forgive my bluntness, but how did you construct this vessel? The resources required should have exceeded your civilization's capabilities. Okonkwo smiled. It was a tired expression, one that carried the weight of history. Subcommander, do you know why humans have fought so many wars? Aggression, Prask answered. Territorial instinct, resource competition, all true, Okonkwo agreed, but also because we could never agree on how to live. We tried to force each other into conformity for thousands of years. It never worked. We only grew more stubborn, more creative, more determined to survive. She gestured toward the window. This ship exists because we finally found something we could agree on. And what was that? Relani asked. Okonkwo's eyes hardened. That we were not alone in the universe, and that whoever was out there might try to do what we had done to each other. The captain stood and led them to the window. Below, hundreds of crew members from dozens of human nations worked side by side. Every major power on Earth contributed to the Prometheus, she explained. Former enemies built this ship together. They did not stop hating each other. They did not suddenly agree on politics or religion or economics. They simply decided that their differences mattered less than their survival. Voss's crystalline form flickered with rapid thought. You united against a hypothetical threat. We united against certainty, Okonkwo corrected. We have been listening to your communications for decades, Prelate. We knew what the assembly does to species that cannot defend themselves. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Relani felt her throat tighten. What do you mean? Okonkwo turned to face her directly. We mean that we know the truth, Ambassador, about the species that resisted integration, about what happens to civilizations that refuse to disarm. She paused. We have been preparing for this conversation for over a century. Outside, a fleet began to emerge from behind Mars, dozens of warships, each bearing the marks of different human nations, each armed with weapons the assembly had never seen. Welcome to our home, Captain Okonkwo said. We have so much to discuss. Director Amara Diallo had negotiated the end of 3 wars before she turned 50. She had talked terrorists into releasing hostages. She had convinced rival nations to share water resources. She had brokered peace between factions that had been killing each other for generations. The United Nations had called her the most patient woman on Earth. Today, she would need every drop of that patience. The conference room on Mars Station threshold was deliberately sparse. White walls, a single table. Uncomfortable chairs. Humanity had built this place for negotiation, not intimidation. They wanted their visitors focused on words, not surroundings. Ambassador Relani sat across from Diallo with High Counselor Mithrin beside her. The ancient Kalari had arrived via fast transport the moment he learned about the human fleet. His insectoid eyes reflected no emotion, but his mandibles clicked with barely contained irritation. Let us dispense with pleasantries, Mithrin began. The Galactic Assembly offers humanity full membership, access to galactic markets, shared technology, cultural exchange programs, military protection under our peacekeeping forces. He slid a data tablet across the table. In exchange, you will reduce your military to acceptable defensive levels and accept assembly governance on interstellar matters. Diallo did not touch the tablet. Instead, she folded her hands and asked a simple question. Protection from whom? Mithrin's mandibles stopped clicking. I do not understand. You offer military protection, Diallo said calmly. I am asking who you would protect us from. The assembly has maintained peace for thousands of years. Your own records say so. If there are no threats, why would we need protection? Relani shifted uncomfortably. She had asked similar questions herself and never received satisfying answers. Mithrin recovered quickly. The galaxy contains dangers beyond civilized space, pirates, rogue elements, natural disasters. The assembly's protection ensures stability. I see. Diallo activated a holographic display. Then perhaps you can explain these. Images filled the air above the table. Communications intercepts, intelligence reports, historical records that bore classified. Assembly seals, the Varadi Confederacy, Diallo began. They refused integration 4,000 years ago. Assembly records say they suffered a civilization-ending plague. She highlighted a document. But we intercepted communications showing your ships blockaded their homeworld. They did not die from disease. They died from starvation. Mithrin's eyes narrowed. The Kellan theocracy, Diallo continued, officially collapsed due to internal religious conflict. Accept your own classified reports. Show economic sanctions that destroyed their trade networks. They tore themselves apart fighting over scraps. These are fabrications, Mithrin said. Then there are the Sirith, Diallo pressed on, the Mendari, the hollow reach species whose name you erased from every database. More images appeared, more records, more evidence. We have been listening to your communications for 97 years, High Counselor. We know what the assembly does to species that refuse to kneel. Silence filled the room. Relani stared at the documents. Her bioluminescent patterns had gone dark with shock. She had served the assembly for 4 centuries. She had believed in its mission. She had never questioned what happened to species that resisted. Now she could not look away from the truth. You understand nothing, Mithrin finally said. The assembly maintains peace. Sometimes peace requires difficult choices. Those species threatened galactic stability. They threatened your control. Diallo corrected. There is a difference. She stood and walked to the single decoration in the room. It was a photograph of Earth taken from the moon, a fragile blue sphere hanging in the darkness. We built our fleet because we saw what you do to the vulnerable, Diallo said. We will not become another entry in your classified archives. We will not disarm. We will not submit to governance by a council that erases civilizations for disobedience. Mithran rose to his full height, his ancient body still carried the threat of violence his species had evolved millennia ago. You are one world against an empire of thousands, he warned. Your defiance is meaningless, perhaps. Diallo turned to face him, but our fleet was not built to conquer, it was built to survive. Every weapon, every ship, every soldier we have exists for one purpose, to make the cost of destroying us greater than the benefit of controlling us. She returned to her seat. We are not asking to join your assembly, we are not asking for protection, we are asking to be left alone. If that is too much for your empire to accept, then we have nothing more to discuss. Mithran gathered his robes. You will regret this arrogance. He swept out of the room, his guards followed. Relani remained seated, her patterns slowly flickered back to life, but they carried colors Diallo had not seen before: uncertainty, shame, perhaps the first stirrings of something new. I did not know, the ambassador whispered. I believed we were helping. Diallo studied her for a long moment. I believe you, she finally said. The question is what you will do now that you do know. Relani had no answer, but for the first time in 400 years, she was willing to look for one. 200 warships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. Fleet Admiral Corinne of the Vanthri species stood at the center of his flagship's command deck. His pale features showed no emotion as tactical displays mapped the human defenses. He had crushed rebellions on 40 worlds. He had broken species that thought themselves strong. He did not expect Earth to present any greater challenge. Broadcast on all frequencies, he ordered. His message was simple. Humanity had 48 hours to begin disarmament. Failure to comply would result in corrective action. The Galactic Assembly did not negotiate with defiant primitives. On Mars Station threshold, Ambassador Relani watched the broadcast with growing horror. She had tried to warn her government. She had sent messages describing the human fleet, their technology, their resolve. The Assembly had responded by sending warships. They do not understand, she said to Director Diallo. Corinne has never lost a campaign. He believes this will end like all the others. Diallo's expression remained calm. Then he will learn something today. Aboard the Prometheus, Captain Okonkwo received orders from Earth Command. Chief Engineer Santos Reyes stood beside her as she read them. His hands were covered in grease from maintaining systems that had never been pushed to full capacity. We are authorized for demonstration protocols, Okonkwo said quietly. Reyes nodded. He had served on the Prometheus since its commissioning. He knew every bolt, every conduit, every weapon system. He had always wondered if they would actually be used. The reactor can handle it, he said. But Captain, once we show them what we have, they will either back down or escalate. Okonkwo finished his thought. I know, but doing nothing is not an option. The Prometheus powered up its main reactor. Reyes watched the readings climb past anything the ship had ever produced. The vessel hummed with energy that made the deck plates vibrate. Around them, the human fleet began moving into defensive positions, but the Prometheus moved forward, alone. On his flagship, Admiral Corinne watched the massive human vessel approach. His officers murmured with concern. A single ship against 200 seemed like suicide. Corinne saw it differently. They are attempting to intimidate us, he announced. A typical primitive response. When their champion falls, their morale will break. He ordered the fleet into attack formation. The Prometheus stopped 10,000 kilometers from the assembly blockade. It hung in space like a mountain that had learned to fly. Its weapons remained powered down. Its shield stayed inactive. It simply waited. Captain Okonkwo opened a communication channel. Her face appeared on every screen in the assembly fleet. Admiral Corinne, she said, your ships were designed to police trade routes and intimidate species into submission. The Prometheus was designed for war. I am asking you, one commander to another, to withdraw peacefully. No one needs to die today. Corinne laughed. The sound echoed across his command deck. You have courage, human, but courage is not enough. Watch closely. He ordered a warning volley. 50 ships fired simultaneously. Concentrated energy blasts streaked toward the Prometheus, passing within meters of its hull. a display of overwhelming firepower meant to demonstrate the futility of resistance. The Prometheus did not move, it did not raise shields, it did not flinch. Corinne smiled. They are paralyzed with fear, prepare the main assault. Then the Prometheus responded, a single weapon fired. It was not a laser or a missile or anything the assembly had catalogued, it was a focused gravitational pulse that tore through the fabric of space itself. The blast carved a visible scar between the fleets, light bent around the wound, sensors screamed warnings about spatial instability that would take hours to dissipate. Every ship in the assembly fleet stopped cold. Captain Okonkwo spoke again, that was not a weapon, Admiral, that is a tool we use for breaking apart asteroids during mining operations. We thought it might be useful for clearing space debris. She paused, if you would like to see what our actual weapons can do, please continue your approach. Corinne stared at the rift in space, his tactical officers were shouting about impossible energy readings. His navigation team warned that any ship passing through that distortion would be torn apart. A single shot had created an impassable barrier. How? He whispered, we have been preparing for this moment for over a century. Okonkwo continued, we studied your weapons, we analyzed your tactics, we built countermeasures for everything you have, and then we built weapons you have never seen. Her eyes hardened. Withdraw, Admiral, tell your council that Earth is not worth the cost, because I promise you, if your fleet advances, not all of your ships will return home. Corinne's hand hovered over the attack command, his entire career demanded he press forward. The assembly had never retreated from primitives, the precedent would be catastrophic, but looking at the scar in space and the impossible ship that had created it, he understood something his pride did not want to accept. The humans had not been bluffing, they had been waiting. All ships, hold position, he ordered, his voice was hollow, we await further instructions from the council. On the Prometheus, Captain Okonkwo allowed herself a single breath of relief. The demonstration had worked. Blood had not been spilled, but as she watched the assembly fleet holding at the edge of her home system, she knew this was not over, it was only the beginning. 1 week after the standoff, Ambassador Relani made a choice that ended her career. She requested permission to return to the human diplomatic station for continued negotiations. High Counselor Mithrin denied her request. The assembly was preparing a formal condemnation of humanity. Any diplomat who engaged further would be considered a traitor. Relani went anyway. Her small shuttle crossed the void between the assembly fleet and human space. She transmitted no identification codes, she carried no official authority. She was simply a woman who had spent 4 centuries believing in something that turned out to be a lie. Director Diallo met her at the docking bay. The human woman showed no surprise at her arrival, perhaps she had expected it. You risked everything to come here, Diallo observed. I needed answers, Relani replied. I needed to understand. They walked together through the station's sparse corridors. Through a viewport, the Prometheus hung like a guardian moon. Its presence should have felt threatening. Instead, Relani found it strangely reassuring. You could have destroyed the fleet, she finally said. Your weapon created a barrier nothing could pass. You could have used it offensively. You chose not to. Why? Diallo considered the question. Because we want neighbors, not subjects. I do not understand. The human stopped walking. Her eyes carried a weight that Relani was only beginning to recognize. The weight of hard-learned lessons. Humanity has spent its entire existence trying to conquer each other. Diallo explained. We have won wars and lost wars. We have built empires and watched them crumble. Every time we forced another people to submit, it created resentment that eventually destroyed what we built. She gestured toward the stars. We will not make that mistake with the galaxy. Relani's bioluminescent patterns swirled with confusion. But strength is the only language the assembly understands. If you do not dominate, you will be dominated. Perhaps that is true for the assembly, Diallo agreed. But we are offering something different. She resumed walking. We are offering proof that there is another way. They reached the conference room. Captain Okonkwo waited inside. Along with Subcommander Prask and Prelate Voss, Relani stopped in surprise. She had not expected to see fellow assembly members here. Prask stepped forward. Ambassador, I could not ignore what I witnessed. The assembly I served was supposed to bring peace. What I saw in those records was not peace, it was control. His 4 hands clenched with resolve. I must know if something better is possible. Voss's crystalline form flickered. I have studied thousands of species, none have achieved what Humanity has achieved unity without uniformity, cooperation without conformity. It should be impossible, yet here they stand. Relani looked at the humans, at Diallo's patient wisdom, at Okonkwo's quiet strength. She thought about everything she had believed and everything she had learned. "What do you want from us?" she asked. Diallo smiled. "We want to make you an offer, not integration, not submission, partnership." She activated a holographic display. It showed a proposed treaty unlike anything in assembly history. Humans would share their technology and resources. In exchange, assembly members willing to break from Mithran's faction would gain access to Earth's protection, a coalition of equals, a true alliance. "The assembly will never accept this," Relani said. "The assembly as it exists will not," Diallo agreed. "But the assembly is made of individuals who might be ready for change." She looked at Relani, Prask, and Voss. "You came here despite orders, others might follow." The weight of the moment pressed down on Relani. She could walk away, she could return to the fleet and pretend none of this had happened, she could spend her remaining centuries serving a system she now knew was built on graves, or she could choose something different. "I will need to speak with others," she said slowly. "There are assembly members who have questioned our methods privately, they were afraid to speak openly. This treaty might give them courage." Okonkwo nodded. "We will wait. Humanity has been waiting for over a century, we can wait a little longer." 3 months later, the first human assembly accord was signed on Mars Station threshold. 12 species broke from the assembly to join the new coalition. High Counselor Mithran declared them traitors. But with the human fleet standing ready, his threats rang hollow. For the first time in galactic history, the assembly had been forced to accept that its power had limits. At the signing ceremony, Relani stood beside Director Diallo. Her bioluminescent patterns glowed with colors she had never expressed before: hope, possibility, a future she had not imagined. "I spent 400 years believing I was helping species," she said quietly. "I was really just teaching them to submit." Diallo placed a hand on her shoulder. "Now you have a chance to help them become free." Through the viewport, the Prometheus held its eternal vigil. A weapon that had never fired in anger, a deterrent that succeeded by existing, a promise that strength and mercy could coexist. Somewhere far below, on a blue planet called Earth, a child looked up at the stars. She did not know about treaties or warships or the weight of history, she only knew that the universe had grown larger, and for the first time, humanity faced that vastness not as prey, but as equals. The future was uncertain, challenges would come, but today, something new had been born, and the galaxy would never be the same.